in the next 2 minutes. Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is Logan. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley Forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Today, we will be getting a look into the works of the British Parliament. I will now hand it over to Jason Perry, Director of the Hinckley Institute, to introduce our distinguished guest today.
While we get settled, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm telling you, this is going to be a forum that you will not forget. Quite an amazing opportunity to hear from these two amazing community builders from both sides, right? This friendship I can't wait to hear about. I want to introduce our speakers for just a moment because we'll have a moderated discussion here for a moment and a chance to get some questions from you. But first, let me introduce to you David Rutley right here next to me here, who's had such a great impact in business and in public service. Before he stepped into politics, David had a very, very impressive career in the private sector. He had major roles at companies like Asda, PepsiCo, and Barclays. He also excels in strategy. In these particular positions, he was often in charge of some fast-moving, high-stakes environments, experience that gave him a big sense and a great opportunity to learn how to make big systems work. That's what you did. That's my observation. More importantly, how to make them work better. In 2010, he brought those expertise into public life where he was elected MP in Macclesfield. 2010. I can't wait to hear about this. Over the next 13 years, he became known as a hardworking and thoughtful representative, someone who listened to his constituents, took action on the issues that mattered, and in government, he had several key roles that we'll want to talk about a little bit today, including Minister for Welfare Delivery and Parliamentary Undersecretary for the Environment, Food, and Rural Affairs, where he helped shape policy around rural communities, food security, and social support system. It's quite unique to have this experience, someone who is quite comfortable in the boardroom and in Parliament. He has the respect, I know from personal experience, for his steady leadership, for his collaborative style, and of course, his deep sense of public duty. An amazing opportunity to have David Rutley here with us today. And he will be getting some questions from someone we know very well here at the University of Utah, from Clark Ivory, also a community builder. He's been the CEO of Ivory Homes since 2000, the #1 home builder in the state of Utah, homes, apartments, and not only has he helped build the state of Utah, he has been helping to build the University of Utah, a great benefactor. Some of you know the Ivory University housing here on campus. What you might not know is all the revenue from that project goes to scholarships here at the University of Utah. One amazing project there. The Clark and Christine Ivory Foundation has helped open the doors through scholarships to thousands of students here at the University of Utah, and thousands more to come as well. He also helps fund the Director's Prize here at the University of Utah. You may know he's been the chair of our Board of Trustees. Clark Ivory is the University of Utah, which is why we're so glad to have you here with us, Clark. This friendship that the two of you have, I'm so interested in hearing more about. We're grateful to you, Clark, for helping to bring David here. This is a very unique opportunity that we're going to have here today. Let's give a round of applause for our two guests today.
Thank you, JP. We appreciate Jason. He's doing a great job up here at the university. I don't know if you understand how much he gets done legislatively. They're tough on the U, but because of Jason, I think they've actually been a lot kinder than they would have otherwise been. It's been a tough year for the university battling up there. I wanted just to move on and get right into this with David. I think he ought to share a little bit, because there's a lot of young folks here that are, undergrad or grad students. I think it'd be interesting for you to just talk about how you became sort of a undirected lad who was climbing through the Pyrenees whenever you could, growing up in southern, England, near Brighton, a little town called Lewis, and you decided you were going to find greater meaning, and ultimately ended up at the London School of Economics and HBS. But really, tell us sort of about your early days and how that sort of happened, and some of your thoughts about these guys, how they might be thinking about developing themselves.
Okay, fantastic. Well, look, it's good to be here. I'm always worried when I'm next to Clark, because he knows me so well that he can ask very difficult questions. So please hold him to line. If you think his questioning is getting out of order, you know what to do. And in fact, in the UK Parliament, the Speaker, who is impartial and holds order, says various things to keep things in order. But the key thing is order. Order.
He's got that down,
Do you feel that? Can you feel that? It comes from the stomach.
I've been a few times in Prime Minister's questions because of David's invitation, and you hear that a lot. It's really nice. Just think how great it would be if we could have our president come to Congress and let him really grill him. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen here.
Well, the other thing I often say to my American friends, and this is slightly going off track, but I know we fell out about tea a little while ago, but the opportunity is always there. If you want to come back in the fold, we've got a head of state, king, monarchy, it's good stuff, and you're very welcome. We've got a thing called the Commonwealth, which brings lots of wonderful countries together. And I think the US would fit in very nicely, to be honest.
But you're doing a reversal on our president, aren't you?
Well, that invitation from me has been there for many, many years. It's a standing opportunity. But what I was going to say before I was so rudely interrupted was, if you think Clark is getting out of order, please just join with me. you've got to get out of your system. It's like,
Order!
Order. Okay, but it comes from the gut. That's where it is. So Clark's asked me, how do I get involved in this game? Because genuinely, as a teenager, there are a few things that I loved. My family, my church, but what I also really loved was climbing and rock climbing. And I wanted to be a geologist and go all over the world and just be up in the mountains. This isn't a bad place to be if you like mountains, right? But I went on an LDS mission. And as some of you know, you can get called anywhere in the world. And I thought Peru would be a great place to go. Somewhere, just out there. And I got to go to Manchester.
It was a bit of a
2
downer.
years.
Downer for David initially.
2 years. 2 years. This was the turning point in my life. It was an incredible experience. I mean, spiritually, it was amazing. But, I'm not here to talk about that. What was incredible, though, was I saw what you could do in making a difference in people's lives through belief and helping them to feel trusted and to have a greater sense of purpose. And I gradually came to the conclusion that I like working with people more than I like climbing rocks. You just have to sort of decide what you like the most. And that's what really sparked it for me, making a difference with people. And when I was on my mission, which is a heck of a long time ago, 79 to 81, in 1981, as some of you who have studied the UK and in different parts of the world, and that was quite a turning point, particularly for the UK. The UK had been regarded as the sick man of Europe while I was growing up, and I used to read the papers, and I couldn't believe that my country would be regarded as the sick man of Europe. So anyway, there were riots that sparked off in Manchester and Liverpool, where I was working at the time doing voluntary work, and I couldn't believe that this could be happening in my own country. So I decided that I wanted to make a difference through business, creating jobs so people could stand on their own 2 feet, and I also believed that you could make a difference through public life as well. Hadn't really thought too much about this particularly. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but these were thoughts that started emerging through the experience I was having. And then just as I was about to leave, Clark's father, Ellis, said to me, so what are you going to do when you finish your voluntary work? What's the future hold for you? And I said, look, I'm just focused on this. I'm not really thinking about the future. I am focused on this. He said, no, you've got to tell me what you're going to do. And none of my family had been to university. I'd done okay at high school, but as you could tell, I was more interested in rock climbing than anything else. And so I'd heard a few things going on in conversations with different people. So he then pushed me really hard, and he said, so what are you going to do? If you want to make a contribution going forward, what are you going to do? So, it's a bit like meeting Clark. They get a bit pushy sometimes, these people, don't they? And you think, give me a break. I'm young, I'm dumb, I don't know what really I'm going to do, but I've got a sense of direction. So he really pushed hard. So I said to him, I'm going to go to Harvard Business School, I'm going to make a certain amount of money, and I'm going to be a member of parliament by the time I'm 35. I had no idea about how I was going to achieve any of that. Literally zero idea, because I had no connections, our family had no money, and I didn't know how to even get into university. So what I did, though, was I then said, right, I've made the commitment. I had learned a bit about setting goals and setting aspirations. So all of a sudden, I was embarked on this really exciting journey, trying to do some, I thought, completely outrageous stuff. And it just started to be very wide early on, and I just pushed hard as I could. Now, I'm going to say something that is pretty close to swearing for all of you, so I'm sorry about this. But after that experience, I went to BYU. See, I said it. I'm going to move on very quickly from there, but I thought I'd just say it quickly. For a semester, just to get my brain going again academically. I should have come here, I know, but I went there.
It was a big mistake.
I know. He keeps telling me all the time. But I met a guy called Ray Hillam down there at the Kennedy Center who just took an interest in me and my interest in international relations and politics. And he enabled me to go on the Washington seminar. So I I became an intern for Jim Santini, who at that time was a congressman in Nevada who wanted to run for Senate. And my interest in elected politics just was locked in. But I still had to achieve all these other things. And so what I decided was, if I want to go to Harvard Business School and I don't know anything about it, then, and Dave Ellison over the back there knows the place very well. We were there at the same time. He's a great guy. Because I didn't know anything about it, and I didn't know anybody apart from a few people in the States who'd been there, I wrote off, because that's what you had to do in those days, for an application form. Because I figured if I want to go there, it's going to take me a while to work it all out. So I got the application form and went through every single thing that they were looking for. And I just broke it down as tasks that I could do to enable me to get there at some point in the future. So after being here in the States for a while, I went back, I studied international relations at LSE, London School of Economics. If any of you get a chance to go there, it's just an unbelievable place. It's very international in its outlook, and it hasn't got a campus. It's nothing as spectacular as this. It's in the heart of London. But the great thing is, you go there, and London is your campus. And so I just made the very most of being there. And again, what I was trying to do was trying to go back to those goals that I'd set and figuring out what I could do. And I was passionate about politics, so I became a researcher for a member of parliament. I wanted to get to Harvard Business School, so I made sure I did lots of economics in the mix of international relations. And then one day I just said, right, well, I've got to actually go to these business schools and see what they're about. And so, but I didn't have any money, so in those days you could get rock bottom tickets on a flight if you took a DHL package with you. Can anybody, DHL thing still a thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my brother and I did this trip to the US for, I don't know, $50 or something like that, £50 even. And we just toured around business schools in the East Coast, because there's one on the West Coast I've heard of, Stanford or something, that's pretty good, but we couldn't afford to go there. So we just looked around and got to know the place, and again, just helped me to decide whether I really did want to go to HBS, but then also how was I going to fill out that application form. So I think the thing is, you set these goals, set them really big and outrageous without stressing yourself out. Because I know, these days, you guys have got so many more social pressures than I ever had. Nobody was bothered about me, and I didn't have the world to compare myself against, because I didn't have a mobile phone. I was just trying to work out what I was going to do and make my contribution. Start really wide, then get more focused bit by bit, but then drive really hard to achieve that objective. So I applied out of LSE to go to HBS. I thought that my 2-year voluntary work might help me to get there. And they said, we like what we see, but you've got to go and get some experience. And so I then had some conversations with friends. And this is the other thing. Be prepared to bounce ideas around with other people. Because I just figured the thing to do, if you want to try and get some of the money that would help me to be able to do some politics, was go and work in the city in investment banking. And then somebody said to me, I think you'd be very good at strategy consulting. And I said, what's strategy consulting? I've never heard of it. And they said, well, there's a few companies, McKinsey, and there's sort of an upstart company called Bain. And I didn't know anything about it, so I just had to talk to friends. Honestly, sometimes just forget the internet, forget all the stuff that you're talking to people. It just helps you process information. So I went, I changed track, started having conversations with Bain, got them a chance to work with them, which again just broadened my horizons, and then bit by bit applied to HBS again and was able to get in. So what I would say at this stage, remember, start outrageous, be prepared to push yourself to a level that's almost unacceptable. Don't have to tell anybody about this stuff, by the way. Just even have a conversation to yourself. But just push it, because the journey that will take you on, even if you don't ever get to the place that you've put on a piece of paper, will be extraordinary.
So at this point, David thought he was on his way. He was going to achieve his goal, Parliament at 35. Great job coming out of business school. But he was a little bit surprised because the road was a little rockier than what he'd thought. Would you say that's fair, David?
Well, I'd like to try and keep it nice and smooth. Positive, Clark. But if you want to drag it back to reality.
We want the reality.
Want
We
the
want the
reality.
reality, David.
Okay. So, confessing to all of you, the journey to try and achieve these things isn't always straightforward. So, I came out of HBS, and my aim was to get into venture capital, which again was really not a thing in those days. A bit going on in Boston, if you remember, Dave. But I got this job, and it was a bum time to go into venture capital because at 89, the markets were going down. There was too much money chasing too few deals. So I joined a little American company you might have heard of called PepsiCo, and went down the corporate route and had a great time. I thoroughly enjoyed it, working in Spain, bringing KFC and Pizza Hut to Eastern Europe, and it was great. And then I got a phone call from a friend of mine who I'd met at HBS to, again, you look at the people in this room with you, and this group of people will be a really important resource in your life. Because out of the blue, the relationships you've made here sometimes just spark something that can help you on your journey. And I got a phone call completely out of the blue from a guy who was a special advisor to a cabinet minister in the UK. And he said there's another cabinet minister who's looking for a special advisor. Each cabinet minister only has one SPAD. So our civil service has very few political appointments. And I got landed this job to work for a cabinet minister who was overseeing the cabinet office, which is like the machinery of central government. He then worked in charge of the agriculture department and then was number 2 at the Treasury. So this was a 2-year ride of seeing how central government works. It was incredible, but it started off from a conversation from, what's your name? Ashley, right? So me having a chat with her, getting to know her while I was studying at the U, and then 5 years later, a random phone call because we got connected and understood what each other were interested in, and I landed this job. And PepsiCo gave me a leave of absence to go and do this, which was utterly amazing. Remember, my goal was to be a member of Parliament by the time I was 35. I was now 34. Everything is aligning in the right direction. This is destiny. What I had to do now was to find a parliamentary seat to fight. I'd never fought one before in the UK.
You should explain that a little bit.
Okay, parliamentary seats, like a, what do you call them? So I'm thinking about running for Congress, but it is the House of Parliament, right? And to get in, although you have primaries here to become the Republican candidate or the Democrat candidate, we don't typically have that in the UK. As it happened, I did have to run in an open primary in Macclesfield to get through. But normally what happens is you have a chance to run for any seat in the country. So that you don't just have to run for Utah or wherever you grew up, and you're really constricted to, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 geographic areas in the US. Over in the UK, as long as you've been approved as a member of the Conservative, in my case, the Conservative Party list of approved candidates, then you can apply to any seat when a vacancy comes up. So I was applying for all these different vacancies, and finally I landed a seat called St Albans, just outside London. And it had been Conservative for a long time. There'd been boundary changes. We do not suffer the same degree of gerrymandering. Have you ever heard of that word before? We do not have that same amount of gerrymandering that you do in the US. We have a boundary commission that's independent that sets these new things. So again, if you ever want to come into the UK fold, we also have really strong limits about the amount of money we can spend on our campaign. So the constituency in the UK on average is about 70 to 80,000 people, much smaller than the congressional district. And the restriction is that you can spend now $30,000 on your election campaign locally.
Can you imagine if we
30,000.
only had that? Be a lot nicer to watch TV.
So when I got selected for St Albans, I remember phoning up to one of Mitt Romney's team, who I'd been told, was really good on new campaigning techniques and everything else, because I really wanted to be at the forefront of what was going on. And she told me, so she asked me, so how many constituents will you have? And I said, about 76,000. She said, okay, that's pretty simple. Just go and knock on every single door and see everybody. I said, well, where's the technology? Help me out. What's the new stuff? And this was, back in 1997, so the internet hadn't really taken off or anything. And she said, no, I mean it. You just go and knock on every single door and have a conversation with everybody. So that's what I did. Just go and have a conversation with 76,000 people on the doorstep. And the key thing is, this makes it in person and very accessible. And the other thing that's beautiful about this is very accountable, very accountable. So in the UK, at one moment, because it's so local, you could be speaking to people about the pothole in their drive, and my local council isn't filling it, to then worrying about what's happening in Ukraine the very next minute. I really like it, because you just have that degree of variety. But anyway, Clark is now trying to put me on the spot, because not everything in politics goes really, really well, as I can now attest. Because here I was, getting close to this 35 magical mark. That clicked through. The election took place when I was 36. We knew it was going to be close because of these boundary changes, but I just knew that I could defy anything that this new Labour leader, Tony Blair, anybody heard of Tony Blair? Might have, up his sleeves. But Tony Blair was actually quite a good politician. And even though I didn't like his brand of politics, he had a very clear plan that was very well worked through and a very good narrative. So make a note of all these things, by the way, because they are an important recipe for success. And the other thing was, people liked him. And I also discovered, because I'd spoken to 76,000 people, they hated the Conservative Party at that moment in time. So you weigh these things up, and
So you thought you were in a safe.
I thought initially, a year before the election, I was in, and then I was out.
You didn't make it.
I didn't make it. I didn't make the goal, guys. And at this point in Parliament, if something goes badly, you go shame. Please. Shame.
Shame.
Yeah. So, what do you do in that situation? When the whole world goes terrible, you wake up in the next morning and you speak to your wife, Rachel, who's just been an amazing sport through all this. And she said, what are we going to do? And I said, very simple, we're going to go to Australia. But that didn't work out because we didn't really want to do that. We really wanted to make a difference in the UK. So what you have to do is then go back to those thoughts you had. Remember when I was under pressure from Clark's dad and things that really meant something to you. And we just said, okay, well, we're going to make this politics work. The timescales probably won't jive with the original goals. But if this stuff really is important to you, you just dig in and you do what you have to do to make things work. And the other thing is, even though you are interested in politics, genuinely, politics isn't the only thing. And the key thing is, you really want to be grounded and have some touchstones in your life. For me, definitely family. So we took this time to have a family, enjoy some time together with our kids, and faith was important to me as well. And I was still able to do a little bit of rock climbing. So you ground yourself, but then set yourself up for the next journey. And you know that when Tony Blair's in, he's not going to be in for just 5 years. This guy's a class act. He's going to be around for a while. You have to pace yourself and figure out when's the next time it's going to be a good time for you to get back in. So I know Clark's trying to put me down.
How long did it take after 35, David?
All right, it took a little while. So genuinely, I was then fortunate to get selected after I'd done various roles, and I got elected into Parliament in 2010. So it took me 29 years to achieve my goal. Had lots of amazing experiences in between, in business and in this political journey. But what I'm trying to say to you guys now is, if there are really meaningful things in your life, they don't always happen straight away, and they don't always happen according to plan. Sometimes, if it's important, it can take decades. We were just talking to Jason earlier on about some of the things he's been doing. It's a 10-year horizon. Now, for you, if somebody had said to me that I wouldn't get into Parliament until I was 49 when I set those original goals, I'd have said, you've got to be kidding. I'll be dead by the time I'm 49. I didn't even know what 49 was. That was seriously old. And now I'm a lot older than that. So set yourself those goals, because honestly, you'll work out pretty quickly how important they are to you, genuinely. And if they're not quite right, you reset. But then you dig in and you push hard, and then you arrive on the green benches in Parliament.
Hear, hear.
And that's what you have to say. So when things don't go well in Parliament, it's shame.
Shame.
Okay? If things go well, it's
Hear, hear.
here, here. Yeah, a bit more conviction. Thank you. You might not like my politics, but come on, at least you can respect the fact it's taken a little while to get there. Yeah, yeah. Again, from the gut.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, yeah.
So you got to Parliament,
I did.
and that had to be a wild ride. It was a great relief. You represented Macclesfield up
That's
north,
right. Up north.
and they were a fairly safe seat.
You would have thought, yes. We'll come to that in a minute, Clark.
So tell us a little bit about your district and tell us what you went about doing. What was it like to be a freshman parliamentarian? And then how did you work your way up the ladder?
Yeah, thank you. So the thing is, I thought I was pretty good knowing about how Parliament worked, because I'd been a researcher way back, if you remember, when I was at LSE. I'd been a special advisor. I knew how Parliament worked. I knew how government worked. And then you arrive on... Has anybody been in Parliament before, by the way? No? You've seen it on TV? All this, backwards and forwards. And what colour are the benches? Green. Yeah, they're green. In the House of Lords, they're red, they're green. Do you sit on these green benches and you go, oh, that's pretty amazing. And then you look over and you see the opposition. These were the people that had been in government before. And you see all of these people who are colossal political figures that are no longer in power, but their job is to hold you to account. And all of a sudden you start getting quite sweaty palms, because it's down to me now. And that word accountability comes back, because you've been elected, but then you've got to deliver. And in the UK, again, politics is quite a tight thing. I don't know, how many people does a congressman or congressperson have in their office? Yeah, about 20?
The staff would be anywhere depending on if they have multiple committees, maybe 15 to 50.
Yeah. So in the UK, we have 3 people in your team. And you're getting hundreds of emails in. I hadn't got a team organized because you don't want to tempt fate. And so you're floundering in that first period, just trying to work out how you can do everything, to make your contribution in Parliament on the floor, how you can respond to your constituents. Because there are some key basic things you've got to get right. First of all, you're there to represent constituents, individuals. And we had advice surgeries where people would come in and speak to you about individual problems, whether it's that pothole I talked about earlier on, or somebody coming in saying, I can't get access to this particular drug. They come in their wheelchair. It's really difficult to get access to that in the NHS. Can you help me? And you're a freshman, as you call it, novice, a bit of a lad early on. You're trying to learn your way, but you've got an ace card up your sleeve, because you are the member of Parliament. You've been elected to represent that constituency. And so what you can do is you can knock on all the doors to make sure you get the very best possible answer for that person. And they did get that drug. The other thing is you're there for the community. And so you'd be working very hard in the local constituency to try and drive things forward. Again, Jason has done a huge amount of that in a previous life. Clark does a lot of that now. Everybody's got a point of view. Everybody's got a point of view about their community. So trying to drive through change is incredibly difficult. you've got to get really good at managing different stakeholders in your community and finding out what's going on. So you get invited to all these different events, fetes in the afternoon or amateur dramatics production in the evening, and it's all incredibly local. And you want to go to these things, one, because you want to represent and support these things, but it's also where you hear what's going on.
So you're 4 days in Parliament,
So
3
4 days
back
in
home.
Parliament, 3 days back in the constituency, and you're just trying to balance that thing. And then, so you've got constituency, community, and then what's going on in Parliament, trying to navigate through what's happening at a national level.
What
And-
were some of the big issues that you can remember first getting involved with?
Well, we had a few Americans visit, like Clark Ivory, and you have to manage that whole experience very carefully to make sure that there are no outbursts from the gallery.
It's true.
But apart from that one, the first up, I got elected in 2010, which was directly after the financial crisis. And that was really tough because we were having to really draw back government spending, which was really challenging. And had to make all sorts of difficult decisions about the future of welfare and how we're going to do that. And we're constantly having to revisit that, as I discovered when I held that government role. But then we had, if you remember, it was quite a sequence of events, but we had a referendum. There are some noisy northern neighbours in the UK. Some of you might have Scottish ancestry. Well, they wanted independence, some of them. So David Cameron, the then Prime Minister, finally relented, and there was a referendum which went the way of the Union, which was great from my perspective. And then there was an election in 2015, which was really going to be a knife-edge election, but we won it, and won it really well. And then, but there was a lot of pressure. So anybody heard of Brexit before? It's a small little kind of disagreement with some people on the continent. There was, and this is directly relevant for what's happening in the US right now and in much of Europe as well. There were really big questions around economic independence, around sovereignty, and also around immigration. And what had happened through 2010 through to 15 and then getting into 16, a lot of questions were being asked around this because there were economically tough times. And in the UK, some of you will know, plucky Brits are quite independently minded as well. The Scots are even more so sometimes. But as the United Kingdom, there were huge questions about whether we should be in Europe or not. So when you get into Congress or the Senate, whatever it might be, there'll be moments where decisions in going with your party is straightforward. And then there are moments where you can't sleep for a couple of weeks. And Brexit, for me, was one of those experiences where you can't sleep for a couple of weeks. Because there's a huge amount at stake, not just for you. I had a view. I thought we were probably marginally better off in the EU, but I'm not a fan of the EU. And my selectorate, the Conservative Association, most of them wanted to leave. And in the parliamentary party, it was pretty well split. And my boss, David Cameron, the Prime Minister and leader of the party, wanted to remain. So, and I'm half Danish, and in Macclesfield, AstraZeneca, I don't know if anybody's heard of that, it's a huge life sciences company, 5,000 people working in Macclesfield. So you are trying to weigh all this stuff up. Sovereignty thing, I was okay about. Immigration, I was kind of okay about. But with the economy, I was worried about at least the frictional cost. And again, Dave could give you a decent lecture on all this. But I was also really worried about what it might mean for AstraZeneca. So push comes to shove in politics. You can abstain, but that's really not normally why you get elected. You get elected to make a decision. And I voted in the end to remain, but it was a really tough call for me. And as it happens, the referendum took place, and David Cameron and others who thought this was going to be, I think, a relatively easy sell, because of what happened in Scotland and the election, and you think you're on a roll. But remember, in volatile times, you're never on a roll. There is no such thing as a roll. What you have to do is to always win the argument and never, ever, ever think that you have the moral high ground on any issue. Because if you don't listen to the other side and figure out where they're coming from, you're going to get a wipeout. And David Cameron also made an error of judgment. By the way, I think he's a completely class act. He was my boss at the Foreign Office recently. But he didn't do what Harold Wilson had done, which was to say, I'm going to give you a referendum, and then I'm going to abide by the outcome of the referendum and then deliver it. What he said was, I'm going to give you a referendum, and I believe that remaining is the right way. And so when the decision was made and the election came through and we voted to leave, then I remember being in the tea room, which is the most important building in space in the whole of the House of Commons where MPs can go. And David came and sat down next to me. There was a space there, and just had a chat. And he said, "Hey, look, I'm sorry. I feel like I let the show down." We said, "No, you haven't." And then the next day, he resigned. So huge, big, personal, economic, and political ramifications of these decisions, and it was amazing. But then it took us 4 years to deliver it. That's another part of the journey.
That's big. I think we need to get to some questions. We've got about 13 minutes left. So let's open it up, see what questions you have for former Member of Parliament, David Rutley.
Thank you. I've just noticed there's a ton of polarization in America, and politics is getting more dangerous and more combative. I'm wondering if that's a similar trend in the United Kingdom, and if there's a way out of that you can envision.
Yeah, no, it's true as well. I think it's particularly true in the US, but it's also true in the UK. And look, you have to be on social media if you're in politics, but I never looked at it. I only used it in broadcast mode. And what I did, I had people in my very big team, 3 of them, who would monitor stuff a couple of times a week and then tell me what was going on. Because if you read that stuff about you, your self-esteem is going to be 0. And there's big stuff at stake here. You're trying to do good things for people, at least trying to. So it's a real challenge. And I think it's a real challenge for your generation, because you guys are sort of used to this stuff. But I think there's a very simple antidote to this, and that is never, ever say anything on social media that you wouldn't say to your mum.
That's great. There was another question right here.
Or mom. Excuse me.
Mum.
So I've always been interested in British politics, but something I've always been very curious about. In America, our politics in Congress can often be top-down. The leadership proposes bills. The leadership determines how everything gets through. In the UK, because you talk about how local everything is there, because your constituencies are 70,000, 80,000 people, is it the same way, or do individual members of parliament have a lot more control over what bills can get proposed and things like that?
That's a really good question. No, it's also true in the UK. Legislation is a top-down process. The government sets the agenda typically, but you as a member of parliament can then influence it. That's the key thing. But again, with what I found with politics is it isn't all about legislation. Legislation is one thing. You can do a huge amount of different things outside of legislation, just by influencing decisions about where something's going to be located and all the rest. We do have something called the Private Members Bill, but that's a very small slither of activity that happens typically on a Friday, where an individual could get, through a ballot, the opportunity to try and put forward some legislation through. And if you're following it assiduously, as I think you are, you'll know that there's a bill going through at the moment, which is, for us in the UK, quite controversial, which is the Assisted Dying Bill, and that's a Private Members Bill. So there are different tracks. That one's a smaller track.
So in terms of money, David, I know you can't spend a lot on an election, but is there a lot of lobbying, or is there a lot of big money that's trying to push people around getting the right policies in place or fighting certain bills that are going to end up having adverse effect on those companies. How does that work? Do you see the same issues that we see here?
Yeah, there isn't as much money involved, but sure, there's lobbying. And lobbying's got a really bad name, but it started in the House of Commons. So if you come to Parliament, you see the lobbies, and that's where the term lobbying started from, which is a good thing. What it was constituents would come along and see their member of Parliament and want to put forward their views. We live in a democracy, right? So coming back to your great question about social media, part of the problem is people aren't prepared to listen to other people's views. As a member of Parliament, if somebody made the effort to come and see me in Macclesfield or in Parliament, I'd come and see them. We'd have a conversation. And we'd hopefully agree to disagree in a respectful way. So yeah, but there is money involved in lobbying and the same sort of challenges, but it just isn't the same weight of money. And really, as a member of Parliament, I think the biggest gift that you could be given is, I think, £350. That's it. And as a minister, £150, and that's it. So it's pretty clean, but we still have problems. You'll see. Look, human beings are involved in politics, and most of them that I've met come in wanting to make a positive difference. But power does play to ego. And so, again, that's why I'm talking about getting grounded before you dive off into this stuff, because there'll be lots of things that will pull you in different directions.
It's cool. Any other questions? Right here.
Given the rise in right-wing populism we're seeing across the West and globally, why do you think the Tories took such a hard defeat and Labour won so defiantly?
Yeah, thanks for rubbing it in. It's a very good question. The truth is, being in government for 14 years it's difficult to continue to sustain the energy and the vigor to drive things through. And then it's also very clear that we made mistakes. I really like Boris Johnson, but Boris made some mistakes navigating our path through COVID, which was extraordinarily difficult, but he made some mistakes. And then, as you can tell from our system, if people make mistakes, there is accountability. And Boris, despite being an incredibly charismatic person that could, for moments in time, defy political gravity, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do. I can't do that, right? Not many people can, but he could. But ultimately, you have to be held to account. And then we had Liz Truss come through, and Liz tried to do a lot very, very quickly. She tried to do what Margaret Thatcher did in 10 years. Have you heard of Margaret Thatcher? She wasn't, Tony Blair, Margaret Thatcher, two great prime ministers in their own way. I'd say Margaret Thatcher, a defining prime minister. But Liz Truss, who's, I've done a lot of work with, tried to do what Margaret Thatcher did in 10 years, in 10 days. And this is another very important lesson, which is nobody can defy economic gravity.
We're finding that out in our own country.
And then Rishi Sunak, who I've got a lot of time for, really good guy, really tried to get things onto a more even track on the economy, on immigration and so forth. But there comes a point where people stop listening when they've lost trust. And that was the problem. And so with Labour, what was very interesting, and the thing that was disappointing to me, obviously, because I'd love to have carried on doing this role for another term, was on the doorstep. It didn't feel like 1997 when I got crushed the first time, if you remember. Again, not wanting to rub all these things in. But what was different was the people were disappointed in what the Conservative Party had done, but there wasn't the same enthusiasm for Labour's agenda because they didn't really have a clear plan. And Keir Starmer wasn't that popular. So what happened was the Labour vote came through, but it was incredibly efficient. They didn't have a huge percentage of votes, often in areas like mine, but they just, because the centre-right and the right vote split between Conservatives and Reform, Labour were able to come through very efficiently. They fought a very good campaign, and quite understandably, they deserved to win. And in fairness to Keir Starmer, I don't think they landed very well to start with at all. They really didn't have a plan. They didn't learn the lessons from Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson, who's now the UK ambassador here. But they're beginning to get their act together, particularly on foreign policy, and trying to take a lead in what's going on in Europe. So I give credit to that.
Last question.
How are members of Parliament?
Yeah, we get, they, because I'm not one now, get about £90,000 a year of that order. Yeah.
Which in dollars is about 115,000.
115, 120, yeah. I don't know how that compares to the US, but that's it, yeah. And you then have your office staff as well.
That's great. Well, let's wrap it up by saying
Well,
one other question.
I
I've got
need-
one other question for you, and then you say whatever you want, David.
See, I told
So-
you it was like this.
So you did sort of rise up and become a minister in the last few years of your,
Well,
time
hold
in
on,
Parliament.
it was 7 years out of 14. That's not the last few years.
Okay,
Clark.
so
Come
you
on.
became a minister
Credit
in
where
the
it's
last
due.
7 years
Thank you.
and had some great experiences, particularly in foreign affairs. Just share with us maybe a highlight of the ministerial side of things, and then wrap it up by telling us what was your greatest lesson learned as a member of Parliament.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you. So it was a great honour to serve in government. Incredibly fulfilling, and felt you could make a difference. The period that was just unbelievably fulfilling was being able to be a member of Parliament in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, which is like the State Department. And I was the Assistant Secretary of State, but over in the UK it's called Parliamentary Under Secretary of State, covering the Americas. So I covered from Canada through the Caribbean down to Chile.
51st state. Excuse me.
Order. Order. And it was incredible. So we were able to, visit 14 states, 26 countries, trying to, after the back of Brexit and after COVID, we need to go out and show global Britain at its very best. So, representing your country, and I know everybody's got some doubts about this or that issue, or who's leading or who's not, and all the rest. But the truth is, the UK is an amazing country. The US is an incredible country. And to be able to go out and represent them, whoa, it doesn't get much better than that. So we had some amazing experiences trying to help push our, I think, 4 key values, particularly in Latin America, which is about democracy. Our systems of democracy are well established, but in Latin America have been much more fragile, and it's something that we needed to promote and support. We wanted to help them with trade, we wanted to help them with the environment, obviously vitally important when you see what's going on in terms of marine, but also green environment issues as well, and also in terms of security. So a huge range of agendas. But at its heart, I believe foreign policy is, and this is my view, everybody's got their own view, because I know power politics and everything is here, and spheres of influence, and really important things we need to understand. But relationships really matter. So at one point, I was invited to meet a leader of a Latin American country where we had had some disagreements over time. And he invited me to come to see him on an important day of state. And I didn't think that the normal House of Commons cufflinks that we give to leaders would cut the mustard. Because this guy was a bright economist, he was a pundit, he was a soccer player, and I didn't know this, but he used to play in a Rolling Stones tribute band. So a pair of cufflinks, House of Commons on, which people like Clark might like, but this, I'm joking, this guy, I just think we had to do something different. So I really was trying to work out what we could do. And we really wanted to make an impression in this very first meeting. So I got one of the team to buy the biggest, fattest compendium of the Rolling Stones in this book. We brought it along, and this great leader said to me, it's good to meet you, blah, 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 blah. Did you know I was a member of a Rolling Stones tribute band? Funny you should mention that. Here's the book. He opens it up, huge smile on his face, and he looks at me and he says, "It's only rock and roll, but I like it." And what I would say is, again, the relationships that you're forming here are very important, and they will see you through some very bumpy times, no question about that. But these relationships you have, learn how to work with people, because you can get through even bigger, bumpier times with these relations. I'm not going to tell you about my single lesson, but all I would just say, because I know we're up against it time-wise, but I'll just give you a few thoughts about the stage of life that you're in right now, and then one final thought about our special relationship. But Margaret Thatcher was not a bad prime minister, right?
Hear, hear.
Yeah. Shame. Okay, people can have different views, right? So let's try this. Margaret Thatcher, great prime minister. Hear, hear. All right, fair enough. That's democracy. How about Winston Churchill?
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear. Hey, this is a tough audience. I don't think it's too controversial in my book. Churchill was amazing. We can have a chat later on, right? We're all allowed to have our own opinions. But best book that he ever wrote, and he wrote lots of them, was My Early Life. It's well worth getting hold of a copy and just reading about this guy. He didn't go to university, didn't get any of the education that you're having. He went into the army and came out, and the worst thing possible happened to him. There were no wars going on. He had big ambitions, much bigger than the ones I painted. He had really big ambitions, and there was no blooming war. So what did he do? His mother was American, and there was a war going on in Cuba at the time, and he was able to secure a spot being an independent observer of the war in Cuba. He got shot at, he wasn't allowed to carry a gun or anything like that, and he just pushed the boundaries as far as he could to just get as much experience as he could. That scar tissue we were talking about earlier on, just figuring out how this whole thing worked. Anyway, in this book, there's a very important passage that might have some relevance to you. In it, he says, 20 to 25, these are the years. Are any of you in that age group? Some of you might be just looking to get into it. That's Churchill saying that. He lived into his 80s and made a huge difference all the way through. But he said 20 to 25, these are the years. And he also said that the world was made to be wooed and won by youth. So he was the youngest ever Home Secretary, which is like overseeing Interior, Minister for the Interior. And he just pushed the boundaries amazingly. Had a terrible time after that, after the First World War, and then was begged to become Prime Minister to help the UK and the Western world in the Second World War. And then the final thing I'd say, just going back to Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson was at the dispatch box when he left office, and he said a few things. The first thing he said was, in typical Boris Johnson manner, "Hasta la vista, baby." Yeah. Great Prime Minister, giving it a bit of welly at the end, as we say in the UK. But you got to enjoy his style, right? But then at the end, he said, "And stay close to the Americans." He's one of the brightest guys around. He's got a huge intellect. You can have a bit of fun, but then one of his last things he said was, "Stay close to the Americans." And given that we've got a distinguished audience here of Americans who are making a difference and will make a difference, all I would just say in my parting shot is stay close to the Brits. Because actually, our two countries have done some pretty cool things. Even when we don't agree on each other's party politics at any given point in time. Our relationship is so deep, economically, militarily, intelligence-wise, culture-wise. We need to keep close together, because in particularly bumpy times, which we're in, we need those strong friendships. And these are bumpy times. I've never seen anything like this. So soak in everything that you're reading and viewing, because in a few years' time, and it will come quicker than you think, Dave, Clark, Jason will all tell you this, it comes quicker than you think. You'll be making the decisions. You'll be making the calls. And none of these are easy. And that's why you get elected. That's why you get paid the money, because you have to make these tough calls. And I wish you every success in your journeys.
Let's give David a big hand.
Thank you.
Well done, my friend.
Well done, you. Thanks.